Hello, dear friends. Hello, DEMIREP is with us. Demi, hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I am just happy to be home again. I am back in my environment, my habitual corner of this world with the war paint on and my body armor on and my favorite weapon of choice, the microphone. And you are you're an absolutely fantastic video blogger. I came across your page when I was researching about Katyn, the absolutely terrible event of World War II, where
the Polish community.
and
Yes.
and I started exploring the other videos that you're making, and you already made one video today, and I made one video today. So let's make our second video together.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay.
So can you tell us about since I invited you, so I get to ask questions, but of course you can ask your questions as well. So tell us about your DEMIREP. What's a DEMIREP?
Well, actually,
who is
a DEMIREP is a lady of uncertain reputation in the 18th century. A demi meaning a half, and a rep being reputation. Originally, I just chose that because it sounded like fun, and I was uploading horse videos.
Horse videos, wow!
I'm a rider, horse rider. And then what happened? Have you heard of Sargon of Akkad? Not the king, but the video blogger.
No.
So he was blogging about 3 years ago, and he had a row with somebody called Thunderfoot. Now, at the time, Sargon was very... He was coming out with stuff that I didn't realize you could come out with. I was just a YouTube watcher. And Thunderfoot was, I mean...
Sargon, you mean after the king Sargon, right?
Sorry?
Sargon is like the king Sargon, right? Of the Mesopotamian.
Well, yeah, he had adopted that name from video gaming. That's where it came from. But he started saying stuff on the internet that I hadn't heard anyone say before. You know, English television, especially, you know, it's all, I mean, mainstream television, it's all terribly refined and careful about things and very, well, mainstream media, I've learned a lot since then. And then Sargon was coming out with stuff, and he was swearing a lot as well. And you just didn't hear that on mainstream. And then he was sort of dancing around this other guy called Thunderfoot, who does a lot of scientific things. And then there was this row, and I was watching it, and it struck me that those two people were at odds with each other because of the way YouTube was treating them. It was like watching starving people scrapping over a crust of bread. I saw that, and I thought, somebody has to tell them. We have to be more cooperative here, because YouTube, at the time, YouTube was sort of all right, but I could see things going wrong, which have now blown up. And so I made a video using DEMIREP because that was the channel I had. And I said, that was my first video, you know, it was really amateurish. But I said, look, stop fighting with each other. All us YouTube people have to form a united front. And that was the only video I was ever going to make.
Yeah.
And then a week later, there was the Manchester bombing. Do you know about that?
Yes.
Well, one of my friends was there. She's a horsewoman. She taught riding. She rode horses, and she lost her collarbone. And that meant, well, I mean, she didn't lose it. It was in fragments, but of course the strength in one arm went,
Sure.
and she was in, sort of like that in a plaster for ages. And her livelihood, her means of livelihood was destroyed. You can't ride horses when you've got a missing collarbone. So I felt very strong. I mean, apart from the fact that children were being killed, I felt very strongly about it. Now, as it just so happened, I went to Manchester University and studied early Islamic history and Arabic. There were 4 people in my class, because nobody was interested when I just thought it sounded interesting, and nobody knew about it. So I knew a lot about why that guy had done what he did. And so I started making videos about that. And that's why I carried on making videos. And then, of course, I branched out, because I'm not a one-trick pony, and you get bored talking about hadiths all the time. So I started just talking generally. But one of the things I am very concerned about is the way people in Britain who are so polite, they just assume that Islam is as polite as Church of England Christianity. And it's very difficult to get, because people are of goodwill, and they just don't understand. And of course, there are many Muslims of goodwill as well. The problem is that they are suppressed by the ones who aren't so nice. Anyway, I keep trying to explain this to people. I'm not having a lot of success, but what I do get is I get a lot of shadow banning from YouTube.
One day it will be monetized. Trust me. When we come to power, it will be rewarded. every act of suppression will be paid for.
Yeah. That's my story. Now, I want you to tell me, you came from Kazakhstan, yes?
Uzbekistan.
Close. Sorry, wrong
stan.
How
you just started the civil war, but that's okay.
About Samarkand as well. So
Samarkand is Uzbekistan.
Yeah, and you, what made you leave Uzbekistan for America and then start blogging like this? How did that happen?
The story of my family is not unique at all. I am Jewish by birth, and by certain worldviews, I would say. I think that different peoples have different worldviews, and you cannot take them out of this out of them. Just that's how we roll. So my family was originally from Ukraine and from the Baltic country of Latvia, all Russian Empire then. So my parents met when their families got to Tashkent, Uzbekistan during World War II, evacuated from Ukraine. There's some stories related to this voyage, so to speak. So the whole process of moving from Ukraine to Uzbekistan, which is a couple of thousand miles away. So I was born there, and I grew in extremely multi-racial, one would say, environment, because there were people who used to be exiled during the Tsar's time in Russian Empire. There was a place of exile. A lot of educated people ended up in Tashkent. Unfortunately, I only learned about them being so educated after I left myself. I was not into this whole culture thing that much as I am right now, I think. So that's how we ended there. And then time came. And the story of the family of my father is that the women, they had like I think about 8 kids in the family, and out of them was 5 girls and 3 boys, and the boys stayed in the Soviet Union, and the girls left with their husbands for the United States mostly. And my grandfather used to write to to his sisters here, and then he came to visit, and then I grew up with the idea that a big part of my family is here in the United States. So I kind of knew, and my mother is an English teacher, so I learned English early. I mean, I'm still learning, but anyway, time came when it was hard to. I cannot. You see, I'm not a person who would complain about the conditions, but it was really the country was falling apart. It was from 91 to 96. I became a filmmaker. I started writing and selling screenplays, and the films were getting some renown. I wouldn't say they were world famous, but it allowed me. I became a member of the guild, Soviet Union. So it was hard for me to do anything professionally. So I started my own thing. I decided to make documentaries on the subjects that nobody would cover. And I made a documentary about the Bukharian Jews in Samarkand and Bukhara, the ethnic Jews who lived there for 2,500 years. And then I made 2 documentaries with the help of a BBC. I forgot his name. Brian Johnston, I think is his name.
Brian Johnson, I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah, he was involved. He was a big proponent later on. He was in Israel, I think, for some time, and he got kidnapped by Hamas or something. But it was after we met. He was in Uzbekistan at the time, so he introduced me to the UN people. And the UN people had on their hands, they had a big, small civil war in Tajikistan. And a lot of the warring, so one warring party, the Muslim party, the extremist, the fundamentalist, they fled over to Afghanistan. So they had a task to return people because the civil war was coming to an end. And so they took me to Afghanistan. I made 2 documentaries for them in the refugee camps there. One in the refugee camps by Mazar-e Sharif, and the other one was on the border of Uzbekistan and of Tajikistan and Afghanistan when they brought the first train with the refugees, after succeeding to convince them that it was safe to return to their homes that were unfortunately razed to the ground. So it gave me the first-hand look at what is it like, and I ate soup with them in their holes in the desert that they dug for themselves, and I saw the shoes, and they were wearing I mean no one had the right pair of shoes on them. They had shoes on, but they were from different sets, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's things like this, the huge cemeteries for children who died in the winter. Literally, they were burying them as I was there, filming them for 3 or 5 days. It was the time when the scandal with Michael Jackson broke out of him exposing himself to the kids and the night sleepovers, etc. So I was reading that outside of filming. I was reading the International Herald Tribune with the complete description of the scandal, and then I saw the refugee camp. So it kind of covered 2 extreme points of the world history at the time. So eventually, this activities, they drew attention to all of us who tried to do anything. The BBC people, the AP people, they all were getting threats, and at this point, I was ripe to leave, and we left as Jews under the program of refugees who have relatives in the United States. So we came over here, and we enjoy the adventure, so to speak, great American adventure.
But this was just me. You said 96, didn't
96, yes, 25, 26
years. And Uzbekistan was its own state from
1991.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was its own state, but they still flail. They don't know which. First it was the Turkish model, they called it. Then they fell in love with Germany. Then they loved Britain, and then the United States, of course, was a brief romantic interest. But they changed the whole alphabet thing. They switched from Cyrillics to Latin, and some letters they left from the Cyrillics. So it was a total mess in terms of education. And here I worked as an interpreter in many cases involving Russian language, and people who come from Tashkent, from Uzbekistan, they sometimes they ask for a Russian-speaking interpreter because they don't speak sufficiently Uzbek, and the Russian is not enough. So the culture actually got dismembered in the process, mangled by all this, by all those switches between the alphabets and the cultural orientation. It's hard today to think how this would transpire, but I don't know. I was asked yesterday. The cab driver turned out to be from Uzbekistan, and he said, who took us from the airport, and he said, how long ago did you go home last time? And I said, I'm home, and I never went back. Surprisingly, I'm very eager to go to Europe and learn other things. I think I learned my lesson there. One day I'll be back, of course.
I'm looking at a map now that has, I mean, I had a fair idea of what it looks like, but there's a problem there, isn't there? It's a central plain. There's Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, and they all run into each other, don't they? So Uzbekistan's in a bit of a fix. It doesn't even go as far as the Caspian Sea, does it?
No, it does not. But the whole thing under the Tsar, under the Russian Tsar, was called, in the Russian Empire, was called Turkestan. So the Turkic language group, and sometimes the borders there are very kind of
elastic.
Yeah, they're pretty casual in terms of, they separate ethnic groups sometimes, like Kyrgyz and Uzbeks are pretty close language-wise, although both groups would object. But sometimes it goes across. There was the politics of the Soviet Union eventually when they broke it into republics, so they would have something to kind of divide and conquer, so to speak. And say Kazakhstan is very close to Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan. But there is a intermingling of peoples, and people are marrying. There's intermarriage is a common thing there. And a lot of Tajiks live. Say, if you go to Samarkand, you will hear more Tajik language, which is close to Dari, than you would hear Uzbek language that is closer to Turkish. So that's it's all a mix and match if you're lucky. But it's also an area of rich history of which, when you go to Portugal and you go to Israel and you go to Spain, you see how people treasure every remnant from any period of. I've been to dolmens 2 days ago in Spain, in Portugal. I'm sorry. Just rocks that were discovered and deciphered, and there are tours to them. And in Uzbekistan, one of the biggest found treasures in human history, the Bactrian gold, was found on the border of Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. And I never heard of it when I lived in Uzbekistan. I never heard of it. See, there was
it was more or less where civilizations have been there as long as there's been any civilization. It's a route, isn't it?
It's a called silk, a great silk route, going taking silk from China to Europe or to the everything in between, but also say north of Afghanistan, the area of Mazar-e Sharif and Balkh. It's a traditional source of lapis lazuli.
I know. Now lapis lazuli is. I did a study of that for a TV program.
So take the ring.
It comes from Afghanistan, and it was called ultramarine by the Italians, because it just came from over the sea, and that's as much as they knew of it. And it was far more precious than gold.
Everything blue you see in the West, everything painted blue came from this area. So
yes,
how they blew all the money, I don't know. Look at Afghanistan today.
Yeah.
It was more than gold, and they blew all of it. It's you cannot fix things like this, with any invasion. Let me ask you, Demi. Let me ask you this: the source of British courage. There is now the 200 and something members of parliament. I had the number in front of me, but it disappeared from my screen. Were sanctioned by Russian government now.
Oh, really? 200 of them?
Yeah, well, 200 and change. It's like 240, close to that. So they're sanctioned, so they cannot vacation now in the middle of Siberia, voluntarily at least. But really, Britain showed the world what it means to help other countries in terms of real help. At least that's the view from the United States, because we are still fiddling with with unmentionables.
This is in part Boris Johnson's responsibility, of course, but last year he was already training Ukrainian army people, and I know British military training is acknowledged to be among the best in the world. So it's not surprising that they turned out to be such good soldiers in these situations. Remember, Britain went to war in 1939 with Germany because they'd made a pact with Poland.
Yeah.
When everybody else was flailing their arms around. And I mean, Britain started off by appeasing. That was Attlee.
Mm-hmm.
And he was an appeaser, but we had Winston Churchill, who was telling Attlee he was an idiot. And when and Germany said, "Oh, yeah, well, we only want the Sudetenland. We don't want any more," And then they went into Poland, and that's when Britain said, "All right, sorry, we're at war now." And I think that was probably what Johnson was thinking of when Russia said, "Oh, we only want the Donbass."
Yeah, and it's like Putin thought that it was my chance to kind of assert those crazy ideas that he has in his mind. Turns out for so long, and all of his clique came out so prepared, and they all of a sudden the pretext for war against the world, because they say in 2 days we're going to enter the World War III. And they say that the CRT, the critical race theory, is the pretext for Russia going to war with the rest of the world. And
hang on.
Yeah.
What was that? Are they in Russia saying that critical race theory is why America is involved?
Yes, and
will you tell me where there's the connection?
No, Russia has to stop it. They say Russia has to stop it. America is promoting it, and the West is promoting it. So the transgenderism, the CRT. Organ harvesting also, which is China famous for, right? Last thing I heard about it. So no war with China, but organ harvesting, of course, is propagated by and stimulated by the demand of the West, because we all want poor Uyghur kids' kidneys, right? So that's the pretext that they give, and that's such a bucket of nonsense. And my suspicion is that we gave them a lot of ammunition this way, Russia, not just high-tech stuff like Germany was selling to them all this time since they took over Crimea and they invaded Donetsk, Donbass, Lugansk area. But the crazy ideas, the idiotic ideas that our media is thriving upon, we gave it to them, and you got to be stupid not to turn it around and point it at the previous owner of this gun, of this weapon.
Look, first of all, I don't think this would have happened if Trump had been president. Not because he's a marvelous president, but because nobody knew how he'd react. And Putin would have been terrified of, Putin would have been justifiably worried about Trump's reaction, whereas he knew that Biden is not a man, but a
sock puppet. A sock puppet.
He's a committee. There's a committee behind him, pushing him, and committees never do anything. And then he thought that Europe, the European Union, they're a committee as well, so they're not going to do anything. Basically what happened was, to start with, Britain was the only place reacting, but that was all it needed. You know, you've got a flint, you strike it, you just need one spark. And everybody, I myself included, was really surprised at how we in the West got our act together. And I have to say, I'm quite impressed.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone would have predicted that on February the 24th. Would you?
No, I was. I gave 2 interviews to our cable station here in New York, and they went to Brighton Beach, and I said it has to be. You have to be crazy. I'm sorry. You have to be crazy to start a war with Russia, with Ukraine, because Russia never had it as good as they have it these days. You know, the Trump is gone. Biden is under the the pressure of some compromat that Russia has on him, that China has on him. So he does anything they tell him to do, and he still does. Not do anything, they tell him not to do, rather. So that's the thing with them. So why would you want to fight? But Putin has Putin's mind, right? Yura doesn't have Putin's mind. That's Putin's thinking, and he thinks that that's his place in history. He has nothing to ride on anymore. He cannot beat on that horse. We have a lot of Queen references in this program, but he has nothing in terms of where the country goes next. Okay, we'll keep pumping oil and gas and sell it. Pump oil and gas and sell it. Russia is not a country that can live on this idea, which is quite sustainable. Just stay quiet, like in Portugal. You catch your sardines, you fry your sardines, you sell your sardines. You go back out to sea, and you do it again and again and again. Russia is not this type of country. They need to inspire, as they think. They need to live on a big, huge world-conquering ideas. And that was his moment, as I'm kind of hawking this idea that he saw that, Biden is announcing there will be a war, and Putin, they agreed upon, balancing this a little bit, then getting the World Peace Prize from Mr. Nobel, and living their happy lives apart. And all of a sudden, boom, he sees the opening.
How much do you think, what's his name, Duhov, the economist?
Don't know.
I probably got his name wrong. There's a Russian economist who's sort of a semi-religious economist.
I know. He's not an economist. He's a philosopher. No, we spoke about him on one of my programs. His name. He's considered to be his spiritual kind of. Sergey, help me. Demi, you brought it up.
It's it's something very similar to Dugov, but
Dugin.
Right.
Well, Dugin.
I just got the wrong end.
Thank you for helping me.
So I just wondered how much Putin would have been influenced by him, because he's come up. I mean, he's always talking about the Russian destiny to save the world, isn't he?
No, but that's the subject that, everybody in Russia is talking about it. As long as I lived in Russia and Soviet Union, everybody was thinking that Soviet Union is bringing the light to the world and all those things, and that they inherited it all from old Russian philosophers. And it's very few serious political philosophers in Russia who, in its history and even now, nobody's. And I just that's the situation in the whole world. I was watching this debate with Dugin and Bertrand Henri Levy.
Oh, the French philosopher.
The French guy, yeah. So they were talking. They are totally in a totally different kind of strata, so to speak, strata in terms of economics and worldview. But it was all empty on both ends. Two different kind of emptiness. Emptinesses collided, so to speak.
I'm going to write that down.
Thank you.
And
I take it as a compliment.
Yeah, and two different kinds of empty.
Yeah, that's right. Wonderful. Thank you. So it was absolutely not inconsequential. But Putin is the guy, is an opportunist. You know, he would watch our say our conversation that we have right now.
Yeah.
And he would pick from it things that he thinks should be used against the West. He's very sensitive. We don't use this organ in our bodies. We don't use this gland that is called common sense gland. It's suppressed. And he looks at the person like you look at somebody in the street or I don't know if you use public transportation, but you wouldn't think of picking one's pocket, right away. This thought wouldn't come to your mind that this person should be. I can say to somebody, listen, close your backpack because it's open and things will gonna fall out any moment now. But there are people who look at you and they say, okay, this person doesn't know that his wallet is sticking out from his pocket. Let me try and take it out. You heard of those people, right? That's Putin.
Oh, yeah, obviously. In London, you're being warned about them all the time.
You got to pick a pocket or two, right?
Yeah.
As the song goes. So that's the thing. And his thinking is exactly like this. He sees a chance. He sees an opportunity. And his mind he's a single-minded person. He wants at this point, when he has more money than probably any person in the world, maybe in human history. No, not human history, of course, but in the world today. And he's looking for something else, and people are playing along. I cannot think that, of any other ideas. Why would he do things that he does today? But it's not craziness. It's just malevolence. It's just everything that starts with mal, in Latin language-based languages, so to speak. So he really is an evil and very sane person. But his mind is honed on the idea that he has to find the breach and go into it. And that's unfortunately.
He's a KGB interrogator, isn't he?
Say again?
That was his training. He was interrogating people for the KGB.
Professionally, KGB was not very good. When it was outside of incredible cruelty, incredible, torture inflicted on people, be it Russia's own people or political murders outside, like Litvinenko in London, by the way, and the Berezovsky in London, by the way, and the Skripal in Salisbury, which was semi-comical, but still, and they survived too. So, but it's cruelty. But professionally, they're very weak. Everything, if not 2/3, but sure than a half of the budget was to undermine us ideologically, to undermine the West ideologically, and it started from, I would say, the beginning of the 20th century with the October Revolution, maybe even earlier than that, because they understood. Lenin in his works was writing that we will sell to capitalists the rope with which they will hang themselves.
Yeah. But he's wrong. He's wrong. Just look at what the West is doing now. I actually quoted that at my husband the other day because we were talking about how we were cutting ourselves off from a lot of resources. America also, but generally, well, I'm sorry to say that Germany isn't behaving that well, but a lot of other countries are actually hurting themselves.
Absolutely.
And they are not selling Russia the rope with which to hang them. I keep saying
we have so much rope, we don't need to buy it.
Yeah.
Russian rope is not the best rope in the world. Used to be in Lenin's days.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm surely there. You know, I have to say, I don't understand Russia. I read a lot of Russian literature while I was at university. I was reading a lot of a lot of stuff that had been Samidstat before, you know, before the Great Awakening, and it was all terribly, terribly sad.
Some Russian literature is funny, but it's a lot of things, you know, like you do translations, you have to find the equivalent, and the equivalent doesn't work as well as the original. And say there are two novels by Ilf and Petrov called 12 Chairs and The Golden Calf, and they are incredibly funny in Russian, because you get a lot of references, a lot of words. It's the two big books became literally like a collection of jokes for generations. And
yes, and as a matter of fact, I have often said that, I mean, I think the British sense of humor is among the best in the world. Of course, I would say that, wouldn't I? But you know, when you go across to Europe, mainland Europe, a lot of their humor there involves people falling over and I don't know what, doors opening in toilets, and that sort of humor. But there's the other two countries where people have as good a sense of humor as the British, of course, you know, I'm biased, are Russia and Spain. They have the best sense of humor.
Yeah.
Really. So I know, I appreciate that the Russians have a very good sense of humor.
Also a great tradition of torturing other people.
But there's so much tragedy in Russian history.
You see, in my opinion, my full disclosure, I started my American education by studying American humor, because I thought I loved the sitcoms, and I thought I can get a job writing sitcoms, small time. But I had some certain kind of successes. I mean, industry scale. We won't be talking about industry scale, but I got an ear of some people with my writing in English. So I was reading a lot of Americans, and I think the Brits partially also are of persuasion that humor is something very bright and sunny thing. It's not. The best humor is dark. You listen to the humorists who are like humorists like comics. You know, people who are enjoyed by, who would Charlie Chaplin laugh at? You know, that the person, and those people are very dark in terms of the humor, and it comes from, you know, survival. It comes from the lifting others' spirits. It's cheerful and sunny is something that is kind of cherry on top. Not too many people can do that. The best comedians are also, you know, always on the verge of.
I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to think. The funniest novel I read recently was a novel called Under the Frog. It's by a Hungarian called Tibor Fischer.
Never heard.
His parents were Hungarian. I assume his parents got here in 1956. And it's got that Eastern European darkness to it. You know, it's about the early Hungary, around 1956, when it was just before the revolt, and you should read it. I think that would appeal to you.
I'll seek it out. I'll seek it out. That's fine. It's good. It's good to know. Yeah, of course, because you. I don't know about you, but I mostly read the current news, and I tend to the technology. As you see, we spent a considerable amount of time to set up this conversation, technically. But yeah, it's the world is fascinated by British humor, and it's like with many things. Things with Britain are not that simple, because sometimes people are told a joke and they say, "Oh, it must be British humor because there's nothing to laugh about," and then they appreciate things that came from England, like say the Beatles and their humor, and also they don't connect, they don't see the contradiction. They just they write at something that they laughed the next second. That's how we are. Or they would say British cooking, the British cuisine is non-existent and is disgusting. And then along comes what's his face? Literally, this former soccer player, the chef.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember his name. The big guy here at the moment is somebody called Jamie Oliver, but yes.
Yeah. But everybody, it will come to me in a minute. But they cannot get enough of his restaurants, and they go there. They pay $1,000 for a place at the table, and they don't see contradiction. He's a Brit.
Gordon Ramsay.
Gordon Ramsay, absolutely, yeah. Gordon Ramsay, and the world. New York is absolutely enamored with British cooks and British cuisine and British way of serving tables, etc., etc. And at the same time, they say, "Oh, British cuisine is intolerable. You cannot eat anything of it." Try to get some British cuisine in London. Last time I heard is soul curry and.
I was going to say, do you know what the favorite meal? When they ask people, "What's your favorite?"
Chicken masala
for a Saturday night. It's a takeaway. It's a Netflix movie and a curry.
Let me tell you that there are some bad news for technology companies these days, and Netflix lost a lot of money.
I did, yes.
A lot of money, and Amazon.
But that's because it's going woke, isn't it?
Oh, big time! They paid Obama's an untold amount of money. It's close to $80 million to do nothing. And they bought some documentary, and that was made before they even had this agreement. The documentary about the Chinese company that moved to the United States to manufacture some sort of automobile glass, and the local unions are objecting, and they try to find common language, and somehow they get along, and all this kind of Disney without the mice and the other rodents. And they got an Oscar for it. On top of everything, and now
they made a deal with the Sussexes, haven't they?
And now the Sussexes are in line, and the Sussexes, we're talking about Meghan Markle and Harry Windsor, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What's his family?
They're not that popular here,
They are not popular. They are massaged, into popularity any which way. I don't know. Nobody cares about them. Nobody knows outside of this series Suits, where Meghan Markle was in. Nobody ever heard of her, and she disappeared midway of this whole run of the series. And they met with Harry, and she was also nobody's kind of talking about it, but she is a serial kind of manhunter or something. So she had her in her sights early on, and she was looking for somebody to introduce her to him, and she got him. And it's to me, I don't know whoever would have any interest. I mean, royal family is very popular in the States as well. So all our tabloids are kind of mandated to, as they say today, to publish something about the royal life in the United Kingdom. and they are there because of this. But basically, I don't know who's attracted to this. Whoever is following, they follow it out of love. And this friend of mine, Alexander Booth, who is my guest usually Tuesday mornings in Russian. Sometimes we did a couple of English, I think, talks with him. But he's a big proponent of the royal family and the way British political government is system of government is designed, so to speak. But it's a major turn off, and I feel for the Queen because she must be really upset with all this.
I'm sure she is.
Because it's very inappropriate, very unlike what, because people think of it, of everything is like in terms of picture books, they just flip through the pages. And I was amazed in my recent journey into Europe, how much joy of life all the artists through the ages, they try to convey and leave for others to enjoy. You go 1,000 years back, you go 2,000 years back, you see all those temples built.
Yeah.
And I feel when I don't know, maybe I'm alone with in that, but I feel how they try to make it fun, how they try to make it enjoyable, how they try to make it, something that people cannot get anywhere else. You had to go to the cathedral, you had to go to the church to enjoy art, to enjoy, good manners, to enjoy, singing, because obviously, right, there was nothing.
So, just a minute. Now, you want to talk about cathedrals?
Yes.
You imagine most people I'm talking about Britain now, because that's the place I know best. But you take almost all of Europe, it's pretty much the same. Most of the people were peasants. And they lived in what we call in Britain wattle and daub houses. And what you do is you get some wood, you stick it in the ground, you get some twigs and you twist it between the posts, and then you put soil or turf there, and then cover it with lime, and you've got a wall. And you've got earthen floors, the earth. Just pack it down, put straw on it. Now, this was very warm. It kept the weather out and all the rest of it, but it was full of life.
Yeah.
Mice, insects,
That kind of life.
That kind of life. And, of course, there was no glass. So it was dark as well. And then one day a week, you went to the church, and it had a stone floor, and it had stone walls, and it was swept, and it was clean, and it had a window at one end that was coloured glass that let in all sorts of beautiful colours of light, and it had music. It was the nearest thing that a medieval peasant would ever get to heaven. That was their view of heaven. Now, this was all done by the church. This wasn't to do with the joy of life. This was to do with glorifying God and giving the peasants a view of the heaven that they were promised if they lived a life of submission while they were tilling the soil and weaving the cloth.
And they did it for some time, because otherwise there would be none of what we're enjoying today.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But it was those places of worship and those palaces. Actually, now I come to think of it, the world had very few resources, so all the resources were concentrated into these.
Not all, but it was something that people did out of duty.
They did out of love. Yeah,
they made it out of love, and people who created it sometimes, I don't know about, I've been to London in 1991, pretty long time ago, But in Spain, they have all those core bells outside of the churches, and they have in France, they have the historiated capitals, as they call them, when you have a whole chapter or book of Bible told in one capital, and they are remarkably talented works of art. I mean, if you call it work of art, I mean, the word art is very ambiguous in my vocabulary.
Craftsmanship. I think we'd refer to it really as
It's divinely inspired, I would say. It's divinely inspired because I was, the terrible times in French history, the Jacobins, where they destroyed a lot of religious buildings.
Yeah.
And I was in plenty of them. And I was witness to a moment when a family of 4 or 5, led by grandfather, came to ruins of some pretty well-known place. Starts with an S. I don't remember offhand the name of it. And there was one capital telling the story of Salome and John the Baptist. And he was telling it like it was happening yesterday. And was, of course, in French. But then my French is, everybody knows I don't understand French. So, but I was very inspired by the music of the language and the familiar names like Salome and the Herod and so etc. etc. So it was still, and I was like taken. I was transported like 1,000 years back.
Yeah,
at least 1,000 years back.
Look, what are we talking about here? Are we saying? I mean, we've wandered into European culture now. And you go to, I mean, this isn't just Europe. You go into Russia, and there are the most amazing churches, out in the middle of just muddy fields.
Built by Greeks. Built by Greeks. Churches. Russia is an amazing country in terms of Russia is used to be willing, and until recently it was doing it like full blast, taking from foreigners everything they could offer. It starts with the Russian elders in 9th century AD coming to the invaders, the Vikings, and asking them to take over the country, to manage the country, which was very small at the time, and Kiev became the center of it. Kiev is called through most of Russian history. Kiev is called the mother of all Russian cities. Kiev, Russian. Kiev, Russian city. So the connection today is especially painful. But Russia was inviting Italians, Germans, Spaniards, Portuguese, Americans all the time in taking the.
Hang on. I remember Catherine the Great was trying to bring people in as well. But you've got to, I mean, I understand that because, like Britain, it's an island. Well, a series of islands. So in order to get anything, they can just get in their boats and go out and bring it back. Russia was a fixed peg.
Yeah.
And so it couldn't go out and get stuff. It had to bring stuff in instead.
No, they would send delegations. They would send people out to Italy, to Greece, to wherever, all over Europe. They would send, and they would talk people into coming to Russia, promising them things that did not come through sometimes, like it was with the brothers who built the Kremlin. Because Kremlin was built by Italians.
Well, tell me, I didn't know. Go on, tell me about that.
So there were 2 brothers. Well, I gotta Google the name. I forgot. I guess every other day I remember the names. Brothers. I promise something will come back to me. I don't know. Remember what was it? What was it that I promised?
I'm looking it up.
Fioravanti, Aristotle Fioravanti. Okay, and his brother's name I don't remember. So they were brought, and first thing when I came to Milan, I saw the Forza castle, and I said, "Oh, this is Kremlin Wall." Exactly the same thing. So Fioravantis were famous, not being people were not just architects at the time. They were like everyman type of people. So they were into wars, they were into like leading armies, and also they were architects. So brothers Fioravanti built it for Ivan the Terrible. They built for him the Kremlin, and they were promised that they will be sent back once they finished. And when they were done, they were thrown into jail, and nobody knows how their lives ended.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, that was like that. And the founder of the Russian school of icon painting school, the Andrei Rublev is the most famous member of art, most famous painter of icons, was Theophan the Greek. Theophan the Greek. So when you go to, say, early, like 12th century, 13th century churches in Italy, you see a lot of things painted exactly the way it's painted in Russia. And they learned and learned, and they studied and studied, and were very often they were very kind of ungrateful to people who gave him this. Say, and of course there was Peter the Great, right? The famous Russian Tsar, the progressivist, who brought, who, as they say, he chopped. I mean, how was it? Would it be, or he opened the window to Europe, so not to get stuck on
Well,
this.
he built St. Petersburg, didn't
Yes, yes, and he built it just like Venice is built on the trunks of the trees that were driven into the shallow lagoon at the bottom. Yeah. So he learned a lot. And one of the things, a Russian flag is just the Dutch flag turned upside down. That was it was introduced by Peter the Great, who spent a lot of time in Holland studying the carpentry and shipbuilding. And he brought the shipbuilders, and he built. He's the father of Russian fleet, and it was built by the Dutch. So a lot of things were taken.
I remember seeing a picture. I don't know whether it was a proper painting or one of those things they put in children's books, but it was of Peter the Great in British Parliament. Now, a king isn't allowed in the parliamentary chamber, so they'd stashed him in some sort of viewing gallery so he could see Parliament without other people seeing him, because he wasn't supposed to be there. But he was watching British democracy in operation at the time.
He did a lot of things. This picture that you just described didn't make it to the Russian Soviet history books. I can tell you for sure. But you don't do this to a Russian Tsar. Put him in a box. But
Yeah.
The fact of
It
the
was
matter,
a gallery, not a box. It was a gallery.
yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, that
And he
type
was
of box.
peeping
Got it.
through
Yeah.
between two pieces
Right.
of the paneling.
I see. Still not respectful enough. No,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to say that since the Vikings, or Russia was ruled was governed or ruled or whatever, not by the Russian ethnic Russians. They were all marriages between the British and the German and French. So all this is one of the oldest. That's why the Romanovs are the oldest European dynasty in existence. Yeah, in existence, they're the oldest dynasty, but they were never Russians, and they always had this inclination to deal with. They kind of found more affinity with the East, with the Horde, with the Mongols who ruled Russia for significant amount of time, and during its core years. So, I mean, formative years, I would say. And what can what I came to conclusion is that a lot of history that say we learned from history books today is needs some retooling, needs some reassembling, because a lot of things that you learn, seeing the rich, and I'm not talking about the alternative history and other disgusting things, but the details that you learn, that a lot of heroes recognized in Russia in the last 10 years say they would cease to exist. So it was a famous Alexander Nevsky, a film of Sergei Eisenstein, who created the music of Prokofiev, etc. And he created such a huge icon of this Tsar, who was in fact not Tsar, but he was sort of a duke or count in European terms. but he was basically a Mongol Tatar collaborator, extremely, extremely violent and cruel.
But they all.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that he, for a long time, almost since he for the last maybe 200 years, 300 years, he became a staple figure around which this example of honesty, integrity, and freedom, almost like George Washington in the United States. So that's the one of the tree trunks on which rotten tree trunks on which the Russian Empire has been built.
No, there's an irony here because you're saying that Nevsky is a national hero, although he turned out to be a pretty nasty character, and Russia is invading Ukraine because they one of the reasons is that the Ukrainians made a hero of, what's that name, Bandera?
Yeah.
Who was not a very nice character. That's ironic, isn't it?
No, the irony is a kind of word that cannot really explain or depict what's going on there. It's beyond absurd, I would say, altogether, because Russia is filled with, the Russian history is filled with characters who are from total falsehoods to total evil. And they are put on a pedestal and made to worship. But just to provide a soft landing for our conversation, Demi, let me ask you this. What's the attitude in general in Great Britain? Because in the States, we kind of flailing from what I can see between the Ukraine, Russia. There's a lot of people who you would not expect to defend Russia. They speak against Ukraine today. And they say we have no business there, and they should be left alone. Let's build a fence around both of them, and it's not our business. And I know that it's not the position of the British government, but what the regular people are saying, if you have access to them.
I get a lot of people under my videos when I make videos about Ukraine, and they're saying the same. They're saying that, but I think they might be American. Some of them, at least. And then one thing that really shocked me was, have you heard of the Hodge twins?
The black guys?
The black guys.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
And
I love them.
They're very amusing, and they're very, I assume they're for gun rights. And as far as I know, they're, American Republican types.
Yes.
And I was listening to one of them said something like, why don't they just give in? Why don't they just surrender? And I was horrified. Now, again, we're back to the beginning of our conversation, and maybe that's my attitude. It's the attitude of my friends. I don't know how general it is, but I'm assuming it's very general. I mean, in Britain, for instance, we're putting our names down for taking in Ukrainian refugees and all that sort of thing. And Britain was a country, when Germany was stamping all over Europe, it stood up and said, we're not having this. And I think a lot of British people feel the same way about Ukraine. You can't let a big bully win. So how I feel that the Ukrainians are supernaturally brave. I mean, that what they're going through now is just awful. Yeah. And I really do worry for their future, because they're losing a lot of infrastructure and people and everything.
Everything, basically.
So the question is this: when you're in Ukraine and you're looking at what's happening to your land, and you're thinking, the infrastructure's going, every man in this street has been shot by the Russians. Would it have been better to just give in? Well, Russia would have laid waste to the place anyway, wouldn't it?
They already did.
So, yeah, I mean, you know what happened in the 30s. So they couldn't give in. And I think that the British people in general feel the same way. Now, a lot of people who are writing under my videos, they tell me I'm dead wrong and I've got the wrong idea and all the rest of it. But I don't think I have. I've looked into it fairly extensively.
Yeah.
I'm just horrified at what has become of the Russian people. I really am genuinely horrified because, as I said, I've read a lot of Russian literature. I know a fair amount about Russian culture. It's not a faraway place. Do you know, I'm sorry if I'm going up, you know how Russia is providing gas to Europe?
Tell me your version.
Yeah, light and heat. Yeah. Do you know what Britain used to rely on Russia for in the 13th century?
13th century.
The 13th century. Beeswax.
Beeswax, wow.
They didn't have enough bees in this country and they couldn't keep the lights on without Russian beeswax.
Wow.
It's always been providing energy resources to Western Europe. What do you think of that?
I think if Russia learned how to export earwax, they would get smarter a little bit.
I have such a tremendous respect for Russia, the culture, the sturdy, the hardiness of the people, and they're doing this to Ukraine. It's shocking for me.
Some people are saying 100 years. They've thrown Russia 100 years back in their history, 50 years back. It won't be able to. They won't be able to restore the status of the February 23rd for 50 years at least.
No, I don't think they will. They will have the stain that hit Germany. Yeah. They will be covered in that stain, and it's just awful.
And I don't feel that Russia will ever repent. From the previous history of Russia, they will not repent. They did not repent for Stalin's crimes. And to me, example is simple, even simpler than what you said. It's your neighbor's house is burning, and would you offer him to let it? Would you say to yourself, "Let's wait and see if it will catch on my house as well"? And you don't care if it was a drunken owner, a neighbor who was the reason of this fire, or was a child, or maybe 10 children inside. You will just go and kill the fire. Extinguish it. That's it. That's very simple. It does not take like an academy or a Fox News channel to discuss this matter. Obvious. That's why we are different countries. We are apart and we are together because we are on the same continent and the same planet. If you want to go, cosmic. Let me say this announcement that I'm making in most of my programs about raising funds, Demi, as we discussed. We are raising money. Мы собираем деньги, друзья, в помощь Украине. Мы отправляем туда на приобретение защиты для самых активных защитников Украины. Мы защищаем защитников. Они получают от нас бронежилеты, они получают возможность пользования биноклями ночного тепловидения, все, что им нужно для того, чтобы себя защитить, пока мы не можем купить им так хорошие ракеты и хорошие оптические автоматы там и так далее, но мы посылаем деньги в нашим друзьям, которые обеспечивают приобретение именно того, что нужно именно для тех, кому это нужно. Так что используйте сервис Zelle на мой телефон 917-2078-273, и эти деньги я переправляю Борису и Алану Палантам, известным вам людям. Борис адвокат, его сын Алан является морским пехотинцем, является пилотом. Очень порядочные, честные люди. Я со своей стороны также рад, что в моей жизни они появились достаточно давно, я их знаю. Так что, друзья мои, действуйте. Zelle на телефон 917-207-8273. Переправляя все, ничего не остается больше нигде. Целиком все уходит в Украину на эти вещи, о которых я говорил. И вторая небольшая вещь Zelle. Тоже через Zelle. Demi, one more little thing that I also advertised. It's a Russian textbook that one of the authors approached me with. and it's informatics for in games and problems for the children. She developed the method of this teaching, so kids learn early about common sense and how it transpires into numbers and problems, and the other way around. So, информатика в играх и задачах, друзья, 4 года у нас есть этих учебников на 4 года, каждый по 2 семестра, то есть 2 книжки, плюс первый год еще с одной книжкой, которая включает в себя методику, рассказывает вам, как стать самым лучшим учителем для своих мелких. Думайте о лете, думайте о том, что вы будете делать с внуками и детьми. Это очень хорошая вещь, она не связана с интернетом, все под вашим контролем. Садитесь, ручки, карандаши в руках, учебники, и со смехом, с забавами вы занимаетесь тем, что вашему ребенку понадобится совершенно определенно. Делайте это на русском языке, потому что русский язык мы забывать не собираемся. Мы будем продолжать на нем говорить столько, сколько мы захотим. Я думаю, что он не должен уходить в ближайшее будущее со сцены, иначе мы перестанем вообще понимать, что происходит, уподобимся нашим властителям и нашим разведчикам американским и британским, которые не очень в курсе дела, судя по всему. Demi, thank you so very much. I'm back to English language. Two languages I love deeply, and one of them I know better. Guess which one? I just proved it. Thank you so very much. And
it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for inviting me, Юра.
Thank you. And I hope we'll meet again, as Verilyn sang famously.
Okay.
And I know where, for sure.
Yeah. Maybe with a slightly better connection next time.
All right. Yes, we'll work on it. Друзья, спасибо вам большое. Я прощаюсь с Деми. По-моему, было интересно. И всего вам доброго. До встречи сегодня вечером с Алексеем Орловым.
It's goodbye from him, and it's goodbye.